Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to television's Question Time. Congratulations to all of you who've managed to crawl in this morning. I'm sure you're all feeling full of zest and questions and active engagement. Please do your best because we have got a fantastic panel for you this morning. This is your chance to interrogate what I see the programme describes as some of the biggest fish in the broadcasting pond, plus, of course, Dave Gorman, who swims pretty widely, actually, in broadcasting waters himself. The sharp-eyed among you will have noticed that I'm Sally Magnuson and not Martha Carney, who's had to pull out because her husband has done something unspeakably painful to his back. This is a time, as you know, of huge change, huge financial challenges, huge decisions to be made in the television industry, and I hope that the next hour will prove a valuable opportunity for you to pin our panel down on how they're dealing with all this and how they see the future. So let me introduce you to our big fish. For the BBC, Pat Young is Chief Creative Officer of Vision Productions, one of those monumental BBC titles that basically mean he's in charge of a lot of very important things, including comedy, drama, entertainment, factual in-house television, multi-platform, and I think some radio production. Is that right, Pat? Yes, radio comedy. And he's responsible for the teams behind hit shows like Strictly, Top Gear, Antiques Roadshow, EastEnders, Dragon's Den, Watchdog, and The One Show. He was previously president of Travel Channel Media in the United States, and before that, head of programs and planning for BBC Sport. He's been described as one of those rare television execs who manages to balance strategic thinking with good people skills. Next to Pat, we have Heather Jones. She recently became managing director of the independent producer North One Television. She's brought them the multi-platform skills that she honed in her role as head of television for MTV Networks, UK and Ireland. She was responsible for content and creativity across the music and comedy channel portfolio there, where she led an integrated approach to programming across all platforms, exemplified, for instance, in shows like Totally Jodie Marsh and Fist of Zen. Moving across to our other side here, Stuart Cosgrove at the end there is head of creative diversity and nations and regions at Channel 4. Before that, he was controller of arts and entertainment. In Scotland, of course, he's even more famous as the co-host of Radio Scotland's irreverent football phone-in programme, Off the Ball.
There was a call.
Exactly. And many do. His catchphrase, fantastic, you can't beat it, is legendary in these parts and a joy to impressionists. What do you think of the show so far?
It's very good, you can't beat it, as they say, yeah.
Excellent. Elaine Bedell is ITV's Controller of Entertainment Commissioning, overseeing a range of hit shows such as The X Factor, Britain's Got Talent, Dancing on Ice, I'm a Celebrity, and the ITV2 reality hit, The Only Way is Essex. Before joining ITV, interestingly, she was at the BBC, in charge of commissioning a lot of the programmes that Pat is currently running. That's right, isn't it? These days, she spends a lot of time on late-night transatlantic calls to Simon Cowell. And finally, Dave Gorman at the end here, comedian and broadcaster. He's presented stand-up, stage shows, a number of quite wackily successful television series, including Are You Dave Gorman, where he travelled the world to try to find, I think, 52 namesakes?
54.
Oh, 54,
yeah,
beg your pardon.
That's okay.
He's in Edinburgh now with a new show, Dave Gorman's PowerPoint presentation, which has proved a sellout, I think, in George Square Theatre.
Yes, so you can't come.
Not even tonight?
No, sold out tonight.
There you go. And he also presents a live show at this time every Sunday on Absolute Radio, except obviously this Sunday.
They wisely knew that by the end of the festival my voice would sound like this, so they cancelled this one.
Ladies and gentlemen, your panel. Now, in true question time fashion, we have a number of previously submitted questions which I'll invite people to ask, and I hope that you'll feel free to join in as much as possible so that we can have as lively a session as we can. And to do that, please raise your arm, and we have a few roving mics around the place. Let me start with our first question. It's from Charlie Phillips. Charlie Phillips from Sheffield Documentary Festival. Where are you, Charlie? There you go. Mic to Charlie.
Thank you. Did the turmoils of the delivering quality first process suggest that the BBC shouldn't be doing its licence fee negotiations on the back of an envelope?
Pat Young.
What an interesting question. I think people will look back at this licence fee settlement as actually a very, very good deal in time. You've got to remember, during those negotiations, at one stage, the government actually wanted the BBC to take on the licence fee cost of over 75s, which actually will have been a massive number, rising year on year on year. In the end, we did a deal which actually leaves the licence fee flat, and we take on additional responsibilities. So it's not that the licence fee has been cut, we're taking on additional responsibilities, including the World Service, BBC Monitoring, and S4C. And from a BBC perspective, bringing the World Service into the fold, we believe is actually a good thing for the World Service, a good thing for the BBC, and a good thing for listeners. And so the exercise that we're going through is to make the savings necessary to pay for the additional responsibilities that we've taken on. Now, that's a difficult process. It will involve reductions, cuts, because we've got to take 16% out of our operating base. But then I look around the country, I see police forces being cut by 50%. I see other institutions and my local council being cut by 30 or 40%. And I have to feel that in those circumstances, it was a very good deal for the BBC and a very good deal for licence payers.
What is the cost to content and programme making going to be then?
Well, that's what we're working through at the moment. Mark Thompson said at the outset that we're looking to take 16% out, and about 8% of that will come in scope. Scope meaning content. The rest of it coming out of how we do things and how we organise ourselves. How that's going to fall, which is the question everybody wants the answer to, is still being worked out. We're a spending organisation. It's a very difficult, very complex exercise to make sure that you don't do something here and you get an unintended consequence over here. But we're in that sort of, we've been through a massive consultation exercise with our own staff, actually recommending ways in which we should go about this. We're now in an exercise of boiling that down and in discussion with the executive.
And the suggestion is, though, that you've done it all in the back of an envelope.
Yeah, well, I dismiss that particular suggestion. But, the licence fee negotiation was done in record time. But I still think it was a very good deal.
Elaine?
Yeah, it is a very good deal because, let's face it, what the BBC is facing is guaranteed income for many years to come, which is an incredibly luxurious position to be in. I'm sure the process they're having to go through now of DQF, only the BBC could come up with DQF, cutting, as the rest of us would call it, is obviously quite difficult, but let's face it, it is being faced by many other publicly funded organisations at the moment, and indeed many private commercial organisations. You have to, we're living in difficult times and everybody has to cut their cloth. But in the end, the BBC is in an incredibly privileged position by having guaranteed income.
And where would you make the cuts?
Where would I make the cuts? Oh, I don't know enough about how they're having to do it across the board. My hunch is it might be, although more difficult, it might be braver to do one big thing than to do it piecemeal, but that's for the BBC to decide.
You could cut the person who thought that scope was content. that might help.
Or alternatively, you could cut acronyms because DQF, delivering quality first, I was discussing that at PQ, Pacific P, with the HOD of BBC-NI, that's the head of department of the BBC in Northern Ireland, and I think there's probably a press officer somewhere in the BBC that's paranoid that one day that they'll wake up and see the headline, DQ catches VD from a GI in LA, and that would be the ultimate BBC acronym. So I would cut the acronyms.
Yeah.
Dave, as somebody as a bit on the outside of all this, what would you do without the BBC? Is it too big? What would you do without?
What would I do without it?
What would you do without in the BBC? What
Oh,
would
I
you
see.
get rid
Okay.
of?
Well, the BBC, it is. I mean, it's obviously a huge organisation, and lots of people who work within it will complain about, like trying to turn a cruise liner, it takes a long time to get decisions made. But at the same time, it does an awful lot, and it does need to have its tentacles all over the place. So I genuinely do think there's a kind of, it feels slightly Blairite, the kind of DQF and scope meaning content. And I think I wish the BBC would stand up for itself more. I wish it would be a bit braver and a bit more proud of itself, and a little less cowed by its critics in the press.
I agree 100%. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm not backwards in coming forwards, nor are most of our leadership. It's a very difficult time, and it's a very difficult process, and people want answers, and I think what's hurting us is the uncertainty, but we do want to get it right.
Okay, let's move on to the next question, please, from Steve Clark. Steve Clark, journalist.
Yes, I'm a journalist. Is it right that BBC One and ITV One should be chasing the same ratings on Saturday evenings?
Elaine.
Well, I don't really know what that question means. I mean, BBC One and ITV One both have incredibly healthy audiences on Saturday night. So, there are plenty of people out there who are choosing to watch both.
But you set them against each other, don't you? Clearly do.
What do you mean by that? Are we offering the same sort of menu of programmes? Well, look, entertainment obviously forms a big part of Saturday night, but let's face it, one of the key programmes on BBC One on Saturday night is a drama, is Casualty, which ITV doesn't provide. We don't do drama on Saturday night at the moment. So actually there is a variation in the menus that each channel offers. Entertainment is a big part of both channels' offerings because people on the whole on Saturday night want a bit of entertainment. But actually, I think we're pretty good at we have singing, they have dance. We do try.
Let's cut the whole thing off.
And I think, these days, I think Danny said yesterday in his session that he doesn't intend to put Strictly up against X Factor, and I think, I think that would be good for audiences. I think that it does annoy audiences when there are scheduling clashes like that, but on the whole we work, I think, in a pretty complementary way, and I think there's plenty of choice for everyone, and actually the great story is that Saturday nights have become such a great story for British television. It wasn't so long ago that everybody thought Saturday nights were dying, and that there's been a great revival in big-scale entertainment shows on both channels that I think has been a really good thing.
Heather?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about the fact that by the nature of the type of audience that is at home on a Saturday night, it's families with children that need to have shared viewing, and ideally that's very often live television. So I think it's not an issue around the type of content that's being provided. I think it's around, and it's a scheduling question, and whether or not they should be scheduling directly against each other, which as Elaine alluded to, Danny was quite clear yesterday that wouldn't be happening with those key brands. So.
But I think also, what's the alternative? Because something's going to be scheduled against it. Do you want it to be something that's going to compete, or do you want to throw something away and tell somebody, yeah, we know no one's going to watch your programme, so we're going to put it up against the big boy so that we're not annoying people? You have to compete, don't you? You've got
I think also there's a thing where the base of the question can make presumptions about the nature of commerciality. If you look at it from the point of view of ITV, clearly ITV has to maximise the share of the audience that it can get on Saturday night where this big family audiences are available. Equally, the BBC, because of the licence fee, has to be able to demonstrate across a week, across a schedule, that it is relevant to families across the UK, and that the money that they spend investing in high quality content and production is actually good value for them. I would be more worried if the BBC were to retreat from that audience and say, oh well, we'll offer a real alternative, which would be, for example, kind of say niche programmes in the arts or performing arts or whatever, which actually may end up super subsidising an elite and small niche within our culture rather than the mass audience that I think the BBC is duty bound to reach at some stage in the week.
Pat, do you agree? Is this what the BBC should be doing?
BBC One is a mass audience channel, and on Saturday nights you try and cater to families. I think there is a difference between the two schedules. We have drama in terms of Doctor Who or Merlin early, and we have Casualty that comes in late. ITV tends to go for a pure entertainment play. There's room for both. both parties, try and be mindful of the scheduling. There will always be some clashes, but ideally you want to minimise.
Any thoughts in the audience? Not all at once. let's move on to Leslie Finlay. Leslie Finlay from Creative Scotland.
Good morning. Is television now obsessed with voyeurism, whether it's gypsy weddings or Essex beauties?
Dave?
I've only watched one episode of the gypsy wedding things, and I've never seen The Only Way is Essex. So personally, I'm not. I think that's what gets a lot of headlines. But I don't know. I actually don't know how much of the schedule it takes up compared to how many of the headlines it grabs. So maybe it's the press who are obsessed with the voyeurism.
Well, it got it 5 million, I think, in its first broadcast, didn't it?
Okay, well, that's less than 10% of the country. And how many, but seriously, I mean, if you look at the schedule and see how much of the schedule is made up of that kind of programme, and then look at how much of the press, how much of the TV do they write about, and how much of that is that, it takes up a greater proportion of what's written about in TV than it takes up as a proportion of what's actually broadcast on TV. So I don't know. I don't know where the voyeurism is. And maybe it is, and if it is, maybe that's because the public's obsessed with voyeurism, and then you get into a whole moral question of who is responsible for drawing the line, and who's responsible for serving people just what they want.
Elaine probably is the answer to that. You commissioned it?
I commissioned, Essex. I think, look, Gypsy Weddings, to deal with that first, was just a brilliant documentary with access to a world which we are fascinated by and which we were excluded from, or at least we knew very little about. And I think that there's always been a history of doing that on television, and it's clever television making, and it's great documentary storytelling. And it was a bit voyeuristic because that's a community that we don't, normally get access to.
Very much like the royal wedding in that regard. Which was also a bit of a ratings hit, and was also quite voyeuristic.
Yes, although some gypsies pay tax.
Essex is a slightly different thing, obviously, but there's nothing especially voyeuristic, I don't think, about Essex. It's we are following a group of people in a soap opera way.
You certainly can't argue that you're looking at real life. So,
real life in Essex.
In that sense.
There has been a tradition of this kind of storytelling in television for a long while, and I don't think it's, there have been 2 great examples of it this year, and there'll be many more, I'm sure, next year.
And in fact, another example of what, in BBC Scotland terms, was The Scheme, which was a very sort of gritty look at a housing scheme in Scotland, which came in for a lot of criticism, as well as very high viewing figures, didn't it? Just
yes,
because
it did.
of the voyeuristic element.
And in lots of ways, I think that's going back to the question about the nature of voyeurism. I think these 3 programmes, The Scheme, which was set in Onthank, which is a scheme in Kilmarnock in the west coast of Scotland, My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, which followed gypsy and travelling communities in different parts of the UK, and then The Only Way is Essex, which is self-evidently set in Essex. These are, first of all, geographically very spread across the UK. I would argue that they're actually very different programmes, to be honest, although they all share the idea that a camera turns up and views some action which may or may not be manipulated or in some way worked on by the production team. But if our definition is voyeurism, is that a camera turns up to view something, then almost all media is in some form or another, whether it's film or television, is in some sense voyeuristic. Even the mainstream news, if we were looking at the events in Libya over the last few days, there was quite a lot of fascination in one of the news items about the amount of designer shirts that Gaddafi's family had stored away in their home, and that level of kind of news voyeurism, you could say, exists. But with something like The Scheme, I think that the term that was often used in the debate about it in Scotland particularly was the term of poverty porn was the term that was used. In other words, that, you know, a kind of, if you like, an elite middle class were enjoying watching, you know, an underclass within a deprived housing scheme in Scotland, which would not normally be on television in the way that they were shown.
And was that not a fair point, Stuart? And is that not the point actually about a lot of these programmes? It's the tone that's taken, whether it's patronising poverty porn or whether it's the slightly sort of mocking tone that was taken with Gypsy Wedding.
I think there's no question that sometimes the tonality of programmes that seem to be perhaps sneering at their subject or finding humour in some of the kind of behaviours of the subject, that can sometimes tip something into, for me, a programme that I really like or really don't like. But one thing I would say about the scheme, and I've kind of defended, even although it's a BBC programme, not a Channel 4 programme, I've been very keen to defend that because I think it showed a slice of Scottish life that's never ever shown on television and rarely ever makes the network, and when it went on the network it did okay as well. But in Scotland we're talking here about a 65-75% share of the audience, and so clearly a lot of Scottish people felt that that programme, in whatever its manifestation, was showing them something that they weren't getting elsewhere in their lives. Heather,
MTV, where you were until very recently, arguably thrives on this kind of voyeurism.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the eternal debate that brands like MTV have is how do you continue to engage young people with the medium of television when there's so many other demands on their time, and what are the kind of things that are going to cut through? And I think the fantastic thing about shows like Gypsies and Essex is that every single young person I know watches them and talks about them avidly in tweets and Facebooks, and so I think they are engaging young people with our medium, which is not to be sneezed at.
Pat?
Yeah, I mean, they are very, very different programmes, and I think the scheme was an insight into a slice of life that most of us have never experienced and never want to. But it's really important if we want to understand this country, not just Scotland, but the UK, that we understand what's happening in communities like that.
Does it matter that it was arguably an unfair depiction of that community?
You can get into big and long drawn-out arguments about fairness, but I mean, I think the ambition, which was to document that community and bring it to a bigger audience so that we better understand the country we live in, I think is perfectly valid.
Would BBC Three ever do the only...
BBC Three do a lot of challenging social documentary. And actually, I don't know if you watched Our War, which has been a brilliant documentary series about, you know, young men at the front line, largely filmed themselves and then turned into television. Again, is it voyeuristic? I don't think so. I think it's compelling television. And actually, I sat down with my children, 15 and 13, and for the first time they engaged with what the reality was of being a soldier at the front line.
I think there's a generational thing going on here. I think what you were saying about young people tweeting and the rest of it about those shows is that actually that looks voyeuristic to us because we're of a certain generation. But the way young people are engaging on Facebook and Bebo and MySpace is incredibly confessional, and they share much more than seems healthy to me as a 40-year-old man. The idea that there'd be any photos of, you know, online from when I was 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and sort of, that seems ridiculous. But that is how people are now. So maybe there's a generation that don't see it as voyeuristic because they're sharing all these little tiny details of their own lives quite routinely. And so it doesn't seem as odd.
Our family went on holiday this summer, and before the week was out, our entire holiday was across Facebook.
I know, I saw it. I know.
I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did. You know, you're just sitting eating your breakfast, and the teenager's taking a snap, and the next moment, you know, somebody's phoning you up and saying, "Did you enjoy your sugar puffs?"
Yeah. To a child who's doing that, does this TV look as voyeuristic as it seems to us? I think that's
Sally, I'd never had you down as Butlins somehow. I really hadn't. It must be delivering quality first, right? Cutbacks to BBC presenters.
But I think Dave makes a good point. I think there is a generation, the generation that's grown up on Facebook has very different notions of privacy. You know, my kids have very different notions of privacy to me, and you know, they've grown up with CCTV, they've grown up with sharing their lives, as you say, almost without censorship on Facebook. I think, you know, that will have quite a long-lasting effect on.
Are we in the right place then to be deciding what they want?
Sorry?
You know, if they are so different, the people who are making the decisions in television right now, you know, how is it possible
Well,
actually to make
they're
the
not the only
correct
audience
choices?
we're catering for, of course, but I think we do take that into account, particularly when you're thinking about programs that are directly for that generation. I think it is taken into account.
Anybody got any thoughts on this? Yes, gentleman here.
Andrew Yates. I just wonder, in that context, how much sort of increasing data analysis will actually make broadcast services more prescriptive and nervous about trying something entirely new in the future, because you've got so much analysis that actually suggests what you should do, rather than actually allowing risks to be taken and presenting something new in the future.
Good question, Stuart.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because I think that there is a tendency within our broadcast culture to try to predict. We do it instinctively around shows that we think might rate, or shows that we think might reach a particular audience, or shows that we feel have got legs in them to run over several weeks or whatever. So I think television is actually predictive in that sense. And as we become more data rich, mining more and more data from consumers, whether they're watching stuff on video on demand or whether they're watching stuff on mobile media technology or whatever, I think that broadcasters will become much more data aware. And I think you're absolutely right, Andrew, that one of the motivations that Channel 4 has in this area, and we've been quite public about it, is that we want a much deeper connection with our audience, and audiences, plural. It's quite interesting if you take a very simple thing like Channel 4 news updates on mobile, the snowmail and the text that come from Channel 4 News and from Jon Snow, that we've already built up a very kind of rich database of people who've subscribed to that particular service. And we make the presumption, I think rightly, that they would also be interested in other serious programme making that we might be doing, whether it's in international documentaries or news and current affairs or breaking news stories or whatever. The danger is, I think, as you suggest, is that you might end up with a situation where data determines rather than creative decision-making determines. And those two things, I think, have to be kept in real fine-tune, because it's really, really interesting that from my perspective, in terms of people I've worked with, the best commissioning editors were not so much the ones that were obsessed with what research was telling them, but people that were acting on instincts of this programme will work and it will take us on. So actually, going back to My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, the guy who commissioned that was actually in Factual Entertainment at the time and worked very, very hard on that programme. It wasn't seen as a breakout hit within Channel 4. We'd commissioned it for a single documentary, and in fact, it was some months later when it actually hit the schedule and started to gain its momentum that everyone became convinced it was a hit. So there was a lot of knowledge after the event, and television is fantastic for people for being wise after the event, and everybody claims hits as you were, and turkeys are orphans, as they say. So I think you've got to be careful that data's there to inform and shape and help you understand and connect better with audiences, but creative decision making is a different skill.
Pat, this is a key question for the BBC, isn't it? Because I mean, it's likely to inhibit even further the kind of risk-taking that the BBC is accused of not doing enough of.
BBC, we're always accused of not taking enough risk, and I think we take risk in large parts of the schedules most days of the week. I think the biggest danger, actually, not just from the data, but also this endless chasing of young audiences, is that I think the most depressing thing I heard after MTV had Geordie Shore, which was a breakout hit for MTV, was that they recommissioned Geordie Shore and are now going to do Mersey Shore. And then you can imagine they're going to do Cornwall Shore, and then they're going to do Bournemouth Shore, at which point I give up the sort of will to live. I think the real challenge for us, I mean, having a licence fee is a massive privilege, and we have an obligation to constantly press and innovate. And I think if you believe the BBC is copycatting and Me Tooing, then I think you've got every right to complain. It's up for us to actually go out to be distinctive and to take risk.
Heather?
Actually, I don't think they have commissioned Mersey Shore. I think that was just a rumour.
Thank God.
I have to say, I'm an eternal optimist, and I think commissioners commission shows that they totally fall in love with and think are brilliant and want to watch on the telly. And I think that will always determine people's decision-making.
Okay. Next question, please. Jane Brotherson. Jane? Yes, down at the front here.
Has the panel or anyone they've employed ever bribed a policeman?
Who do you want to give that to first then? Elaine, have you ever bribed a policeman?
No. Well, I haven't, and as far as I know, no one I've employed has. That's my short answer.
Yes, I have. I was trying to get in to see Scotland and Mexico City in the 1980s in the World Cup, and the Mexican police were known to be corrupt and would take UK pounds, or Scottish pounds as we were given them at the time, to let you in this back slip door, and I bribed a Mexican cop. Quite happy to come clean. I know it's in breach of all the media protocols, but at the time, I did not give a fuck.
Pat, taking the serious aspect,
taking the high ground.
Yes. Moral high ground.
I personally haven't, and as far as the BBC's aware, nobody has. We certainly have no record and have a strong belief that nobody has either.
Can you imagine any circumstances in which they
bribing a police officer? I can't imagine any circumstances where we'd bribe a police officer. There's this whole hal around hacking and invasions of privacy, and as you would know, we have very comprehensive guidelines about what you'd need to do if you're going to even just doorstep somebody. There's a whole process you have to go through, and it's all documented and logged, but we have no evidence and no reason to believe that anybody has bribed a policeman or hacked into somebody's mobile phone.
Does it make you worry at all about Sky being such a big player?
Does it make me worry about?
Sky?
I don't worry about Sky journalists. I think Sky News is a class act and a class operation, and you shouldn't damn all the children for the sins of one part of the empire. As they said, a very small part of their empire. I haven't got a lot of time for Sky News.
Heather, you're bribing confessions?
No bribing confessions. Although I have to say, having worked for an American organisation that obviously is global, the guys in New York used to get very uneasy about the way that business was conducted by our channels over in Italy. So that's probably as close to the organisation as I've experienced it.
Dave?
I have, but only because two of my brothers are policemen.
Let's move on to a question now from Krishnan Arora. Krishnan, where are you, Krishnan? A newly independent producer?
Okay, if the panel had £60 million, would they rather spend it on boy racers or culture vultures?
Boy racers. This is a BBC 4 reference, perhaps? Stuart? Formula One.
Oh, Formula One.
Formula One. Actually,
I was at a Channel 4 question, sorry, I missed the...
Actually, it's possibly also a... Heather Jones,
I don't understand the question.
you're
I'm
with...
struggling to
I think
compute.
am I right in thinking that what's behind that question is should be spending the money on Formula One? The BBC's recently reached a deal with Sky on this, or on highbrow cultural events. Is that correct?
Yeah.
North One that you're now with actually produced Formula One for ITV, didn't it, in years past before it went to the BBC?
They did. I have to say, I do think it's extraordinary that by still spending a considerable amount of money retaining a certain amount of those rights, that the BBC say they're doing that. That's in the interest of the British public, that it partially remains with a public service broadcaster. But obviously some of those races are now moving across to Sky. I think that's absolutely ludicrous. If it was really in the public interest, why not let Channel 4 bid for it, who were very clear that they were in the running, and save that still considerable amount of money for, indeed, the more kind of cultured or other shows. I do not think the BBC should be competing for sports rights such as Formula One in any way whatsoever.
What other sports rights shouldn't we do?
You can keep Wimbledon. I'll let you keep Wimbledon.
No, that works for you.
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay.
So, Pat, you think you think they're spending the money the correct way then?
I mean, look, there's going to be less of the BBC, right? We're going to have to take money out. Things are going to go. So we're all going to have to get used to, maybe all of us, losing something that we previously valued. I think the deal that they've done with Formula One, I mean, first of all, we have a long history of sharing sports rights with Sky. We share the FA Cup with Sky. We shared England with Sky. We share the Masters Golf with Sky. So sharing Formula One with Sky isn't that new in terms of how sports rights deals work.
At the same time as people are having to fight to save Channel 4.
Fight to save
BBC
Channel
4, I beg your pardon.
Well,
Stuart on the brain.
I think
BBC
comparing F1 and BBC 4 is like, which of your children do you love most? It's far more complicated than that. You know, Formula 1 and BBC 4 reach entirely different audiences, for example. So I think that the decision that they had to make is we needed to save money, which we have done on the new deal, and we actually managed to save money and extend the deal. We've kept half of the rights, including all of the significant rights for the UK audience. And we have various other rights, which I wouldn't pretend to fully understand, which means we don't just offer highlights, we can almost offer the whole race just on a delayed basis. So net, I think it's a good deal. I'm sure other people would have loved to have bid for it, but the nature of sports rights and the market for sports rights is we have that contract for 2 more years, and who knows, we could have, at the end of 2 years, we may not have rebid for it, and Sky may have taken it all. So, yeah.
Elaine, do you accept that argument, or is it specious to say that actually they are completely different, Formula 1 and BBC 4, and therefore that, you don't bring them into the same argument?
Well, clearly polarising those two things is as Pat said, it is more complicated than that. I mean, of course, the BBC has got to cut something, and Formula 1, I mean, I suppose what's happened actually is that they've got the money back from Sky, haven't they, rather than cut it. But clearly that was a relatively easy decision for the BBC to make, and a saving for them to make. And they beyond that, they're going to have to do other things as well. So it doesn't just solve the problem. But I think Channel 4 clearly were very keen to be in there bidding for it, but didn't get it.
Yeah, it's Channel 4 were very keen. We made a bid. We made a bid that we felt we could afford in relationship to the rights package, and of course the consideration that we had to put into place was, what levels of audience would it attract to Channel 4, what type of viewer would be watching it, and how could we sell advertising, sponsorship and other commercial activity around it. And Channel 4 went in, and we also spoke to the BBC about maybe getting involved with us as well. That didn't, as it happened, pan out, but we had a very, very, very strong creative bid. It's one that I think that internally we're massively proud of, but we lost out, and we lost out on the back of the money. And I think that Channel 4 understands that we are not the biggest broadcaster in the world, and we have to be fleet of foot, and sometimes we have to come in at the side, and sometimes we have to use our creative energies to offset maybe the big spending power. But I think that when it comes to sports rights, money is king, and creativity is important, but money is king, and we lost out. Perhaps if there's probably a lesson maybe in this, the complexity of the rights are such as well that many people within Formula 1 itself, including 2 or 3 of the big Formula 1 racing teams, were very, very keen for Formula 1 to stay free to air and not go behind Sky's paywall, because we know from other sports that free to air can often mean that big audiences see the live coverage, and that it remains part of the kind of popular consciousness. Sometimes when things go behind paywalls, we've seen it in the past with boxing, arguably even with some areas of football as well, that the paywall can be an inhibitor. And I think that was the kind of debate. I personally would have preferred to see a BBC Channel 4 bid go in, but that proved not to be possible.
Well, what is your view then of the question, would you rather spend your money?
Sorry?
What is your view of the question, which is, as far as I can gather it was, would you rather spend your money on cars?
Yeah, well this particular thing...
Or a highbrow cultural channel like BBC4?
This particular bid was for rights looking forward rather than in the current immediate period. And I think that what Channel 4 is clearly doing there was looking at how in the near future we could be more commercially robust as an organisation. That's why we made the bid the level we could, because if we'd bid above that level, it would have ceased to have been commercially viable for us. And that's the whole point about sports rights. You can't, the truth of the matter is, if you look at it from Bernie Ecclestone's point of view, he's in there trying to get the best financial deal that he can get for his asset. If Channel 4 can't punch to that level and he has someone else that can, sentiment and trendy graphics kind of go out the window a little bit, you know, because in the end it's down to dosh. And so we don't have the rights, but we do have the commitment to funding the money. But remember, Channel 4 bid and successfully got the rights to the Paralympics, so we had already made a significant commitment in sports rights. So we weren't diverting the money from sports rights away from the arts.
Okay.
That's a kind of false equation.
Okay, Dave, to take the other half of that question,
Yeah.
the highbrow cultural channel, BBC 4, is it worth it? What is the value
I would,
of a channel like
well,
that?
You're right about the kind of, you know, it's basically just a commercial decision. I think there is an interesting thing with, I think in America with American football, they made a decision they wanted to stay on one of the major networks and not go behind a paywall because they have a very competitive market between the sort of three major sports over there. And American football feels like it's made the right decision by staying on free-to-air.
Actually, American football
is it now behind the paywall?
And ABC, and I mean, what they've done with American football is actually they've shared it across all of the networks, including ESPN.
Yeah. But the idea that, I mean, my Twitter feed is full of people trying to get me to campaign to keep Formula One on free-to-air. And I don't watch it, and I don't care about it, and I don't understand it, and whatever. But if anyone wants to try and enforce it as free-to-air, then you're no longer a free market, and then Bernie Ecclestone's going to complain because he won't get top dollar. So you can't enforce it, you have to do one thing or the other. Personally, because of my taste, I would rather have BBC 4, but at the same time, I'd rather some of what's on BBC 4 was on BBC 2. I think sometimes those channels can be an excuse to take things out of the mainstream.
Pat?
And I don't think it's exclusively true. I think there's some Adam Curtis stuff and there's some great stuff on BBC 2. But I do think some of what used to be on BBC 2 when I was a kid is now being sort of shipped out to BBC 4.
I think it's a complex relationship between 4 and 2. There is some stuff on 4 that will eventually play on 2 but doesn't launch on 2. And you know, some people, if that's your particular passion, you'd rather it was on 2 first. But 4 has been a very important nursery slope to get things to 2. So Thick of It started on 4, came to 2. You know, things like that. So 4 does play a role in terms of bringing things. And 2012, which is currently on air, started on 4, came to 2. New series will be on 2. So 4 does play a role in relationship to 2, but it is something we need, I think, to be a bit clearer about.
What do you think is going to happen to BBC 4?
What I think is going to happen to BBC 4, that's a fantastic question that you really need to ask the Trust. BBC 4 will still be here, and BBC 4 will still be the leading, I'm sure whatever happens, it will still be...
What would you like to see happen?
And look, what I would love to see was that there was no cuts, there was no DQF. In fact, we got more money and we could spend it on more things. But in the real world, you know, we've got to make cuts. We've got to make, you know, I use the word, we've got to make cuts. You know, we're going to have to stop doing some things. And I just hope that what we manage to do is protect as far as possible our services to the audience, even though that may take some sort of internal revolution in terms of how we're organised and what we do. You've already seen the actions around senior management pay. You've seen what we're doing about delayering the organisation. There's work we've got to do about making the BBC a simpler place to do business within and do business with. How
much does the BBC care about the BBC 4 audience?
We care about all of our audience. Again, which of your children do you love more? We care about all of our audiences, but let's not pretend all of our audiences are going to lose something.
Okay. Next question. We have Sarah Hawkins. Sarah Hawkins, where are you? Thanks very much.
Good morning. Would the panel describe themselves as lovies or boffins, and does it matter?
Now, this, I think, is a reference to Eric Schmidt of Google, his McTaggart lecture. And I think he was making the point that he said we didn't get our education right in this country. We weren't producing the kind of people through our education system who would be qualified for where the television and internet revolution is going. Heather Jones?
Personally, I think I'm a lovey through and through, although I'm going to have to become a bit more of a boffin given that I now work for the company that makes the gadget show, so I obviously have an obligation to work on my boffin skills. I don't think it's necessarily about the individuals combining those skills. I think it's about making sure that any organisation or any channel has a rounded set of skills, because yes, of course, you can no longer afford
But
to
are
be
you
too
seeing
far
these
one way or
rounded
the
set
other.
of skills coming up? I mean, this I think is his point.
Sorry?
I mean, Elaine, you were there. Give us a sense of what Eric Schmidt, the point he was trying to make by saying, you know, he wanted to go back to Victorians rather than Lord Sugar.
Yes, I mean, it was a point mostly about education, about not valuing computer science and science in education, but it was also, I suppose, saying that in our industry, perhaps we don't value the technological side of it sufficiently, and why aren't engineers in senior positions? Perfectly well-made point, I think, and quite thought-provoking point. And I suspect many media businesses would benefit from having technological people at very senior levels.
Are we too lovey an industry? Basically?
I think we probably are, and I'm a lovey too, and I would really quite like to be a boffin. I was talking to Eric Schmidt after the lecture, actually, just making small talk, and he got out his BlackBerry, and I said, oh, you use a BlackBerry? And he said the Android phone wasn't quite ready for a lot of what he likes to use his BlackBerry for. But I said, you know, I still find it amazing. I talked about the fact that I'd been in Delhi in July, and I get off the plane, and within sort of 5 minutes of switching my BlackBerry on, all my emails come through. And he said, yeah, it took us years to get that sorted. Yeah. And I said, well, you did that? And he said, yeah, you wouldn't believe how hard it is. But, you know, that is some achievement, I think. Yeah. I couldn't lay claim to any such impressive achievement. So I would quite like to be a boffin.
I'm a hardcore boffin, a sado, a nerd. I'm one of those people that sits far too long.
I had you down as a lovey.
Oh God, no, I can't bear lovies.
They all say that. That's what lovies say.
Yeah, but I'm
the most lovey sentence you've said so far today. Okay, I can't stand lovies. That's what lovies do.
Except you must buy Dave Gorman's book Google Whack. That would be my other lovey sentence. No, one interesting thing, going back all seriously, is at the core of what Schmidt was saying about the nature of our education system, which is where I think the boffin lovey thing emerged from. And there's a really, really interesting test case here in Scotland, because the first town in Scotland to have computer sciences at a higher level, which is the equivalent of the A-level system in England, was Dundee, which also had the first computer coding and testing factory, which was for Spectrum computers. And they're the two main reasons that Dundee is now one of the leading cities in the games and mobile games computing industry. Interestingly, in the last 2 years with Channel 4, Dundee having never been a city that Channel 4 had ever commissioned any content from, it's now in our top 10 of cities outside of London that we commission in. And you can really trace quite clearly the relationship between the study of computer science and the schooling system and the education sector, Abertay University, and the growth of the computing culture and mobile games culture in that city. So I think Schmidt's right about that. Maybe the schizophrenia around the lovey versus the boffin exaggerates the point, but I actually don't think that we do enough in technology and science in the school.
Dave, lovey or boffin?
Well, I dropped out of a maths degree to enter show business, and I'm doing a show about technology, so I'm both, and therefore highly employable.
What about you, Pat?
Definitely a boffin. I'm a graduate in exploration geology. But what I find fascinating about what Schmidt said, and what I very much experienced in the States, is when you see convergence in reality in terms of where does production end and marketing begin, for example. You know, it does raise some fundamental questions for us about how we organise production, what the interface between production and other areas of activity is. And you know, that's Ralph Rivera's there from Future Media. We've been talking about how do we get our guys and girls much more closely integrated so that program making and future media and delivery and social media is all part of one thought through continuum, not the I've made a program, now I'm going to give it to the techie people and they're going to distribute it for me.
Okay. I think we've got time for one last question, which I will give. It was going to come from Alan Clements of Scottish Television, but he's not here. But the question is moving Question Time to Glasgow an example of tokenism gone mad? Stuart.
Is it a sign of, what do you say, I missed the list,
Tokenism
gone
mad.
No, I actually hate things that end with gone mad, because it's usually PC gone mad or tokenism gone mad. Look, the reality of the situation is it certainly has its idiosyncrasies, of that there's no doubt. But I think that it's what's more what's less justifiable and more idiosyncratic is the extent to which production of television is so centred in London. And the BBC, I think that one of their big cause célèbres under Mark Thompson, and it's not necessarily been popular unanimously, has said, look, you know, if you derive the licence fee from across the UK, it's entirely legitimate to be a driver of culture, creativity, the creative economy, job creation across the UK as well. And with the centres at Salford Quays and at Pacific Quay in Glasgow, it's right that big BBC shows are based there and are seen to be produced from there. So I think that the sentiment behind it is entirely right. And there's another element to it, which is that question time, people would say to me, you know, I've heard actually people say to me, it's barking mad because all the politicians are in London. Well, self-evidently under devolution, that's not true. In fact, the current government, the Conservative government, coalition government led by the power of the Conservative vote, has very, very little elected representatives in Scotland, and therefore, if one of question time's other dynamics is to represent the diversity of a devolved UK, then actually being outside of London is, for our democratic deficit in the UK is not a bad thing.
Tokenism gone mad, Heather?
I mean, as long as the content of the show doesn't suffer, I'm fairly agnostic about it. I think certainly for us in the indie sector, the issue of, you know, are those quotas in terms of the commercial broadcasters having to have regional quotas, is that going to be taken away? I think that's really worrying, because it's a very expensive thing for us indies to do, is to go out there and set up their regional offices, and the kind of debate of will they, won't they. We need to build and sustain an industry in difficult times, and we need to know where we are with that, and not have this kind of mind changing on that subject.
Elaine, ITV is basically centralised in London now, isn't it?
Well, no, we're partners in Salford, and obviously have Coronation Street there, and we'll be looking at whether we can do other entertainment shows in the studios up there as well. We already do quite a lot from the Granada studios. So no, we will. We do less in Scotland, you know, in terms of making the network commission programmes. I mean, I'm agnostic, really. I'm slightly sceptical about social engineering on this kind of scale. I mean, I think, you know, that you asked the question, Stuart, why is production centred in London? But you know, organically, that is where it has grown. And you know, the BBC is obviously ploughing a lot of money into trying to kind of redirect it. But you know, it will take other partners to sort of make that work, I think. It will require the indie sector and the post-production facilities, and unfortunately, in terms of Salford, you know, it hit at a very bad time, a recession, and you know, people found it difficult to open up second bases in Salford particularly. So, but hopefully others will follow. But there has, as Heather says, there has to be a really good reason for doing it, for going there if you're a commercial
Pat, I suppose the
entity.
question is, do you have to be based in a place to represent it?
No, you don't have to be based in a place to represent it, but I do think in terms of the industrial policy of media production, I do think we have an obligation, a duty to spend our money around the UK, and in order to do that, you do have to, you know, sort of tie your colours to the mast and do it. And so we're committed to 50% of our spend being outside of London, and 17% of that of our total spend being in the nations. And I think it's absolutely the right thing to do, and you know, I think that we will benefit from it in the long term. I mean, ITV.
But are the practicalities of it not a nonsense?
So we're going through the birthing pains of making it happen. But the bigger benefit when we get there will be that we are spending our money around the UK, and a kid in Scotland who wants to work in television doesn't have to come to London. It wasn't always like this. ITV used to be the regional powerhouse. Actually, ITV has withdrawn largely from the regions as it's centralised, and part of the BBC's bigger public policy role is to ensure that there is production opportunity around the UK.
I think there is a problem in that people will always try and game the system. So some regional programming is made in Pinewood, and all that happens is lots of people who live in London have a more expensive taxi bill to get to Pinewood. And I know of at least one independent production company who have an office which is effectively a terraced house outside of London, so that they've got an office so that funds can be funneled through there, because then it becomes regional programming. And that gaming of the system, it's a noble idea to share the money out. But when companies do that, it
that's
doesn't...
why we're doing it with, I mean, much public comment, but that's why we're doing it with our own in-house base. You know, moving children and sport and breakfast news to Salford is a massive statement of the BBC putting its money where its mouth is.
Well, what about breakfast in Salford?
Why not?
And the guests that have got to come up there and the presenters who won't come and the
Why
whole
not?
business.
Well, I think when
Why
Richard
not?
and Judy moved to London, that's why not. You know, back in the day when this morning basically ended up saying, we can't get showbiz guests, we're a showbiz show, that's what we do, we're going to have to move to London. I think Breakfast is going to have a similar problem.
Breakfast isn't a showbiz show. Breakfast is a news show.
It maybe is too much of a showbiz show for itself at the moment. I think actually it does thrive in its current incarnation on a lot of turnover of showbiz guests. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that that's going to suffer if you move that to Manchester.
Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously a passionate believer that there's a lot of value in not only moving production, but actually, and this is probably the real solution that all of this was intended to do, which is to generate indigenous production bases in the major creative cities across the UK, rather than move the chessboard, as Elaine mentioned, in the sense of the social engineering of the process. The idea is to make the money and the intent and the commitment to commission from those cities is the real driving force. And yes, it's actually right that all genres aren't the same. I mean, Dave makes a really good point there. I mean, it's actually always been very hard for entertainment. If you're, say, doing a big late night Saturday chat show or whatever, and you're looking for international guests, and let's say somebody comes in from the US and their agent says they're available for 2 nights and they're doing book signings in London or whatever, it's unlikely that they'll do the dogleg flight, to Glasgow or to Manchester or whatever. That's just in the nature of things. So there are some genres which it is harder in, but there's no good reason, for example, why diverse creative arts documentaries can't be made anywhere in the UK if the talent is there. And so I think that the sooner we move away from the moment, and it's probably something that needed to happen, a top-down initiative around change, towards something that's more indigenous with creative talent coming from those cities, the better.
Okay, well, we've got a couple of minutes left. Any question from the floor? Oh, at last, a lot. Okay. Let's take this one here. Yes, number 1, thanks.
Hi, all the panellists manage very diverse slates and portfolios. What's everybody looking forward to in the next year that's coming up on their channels or indies or companies or whatever?
Okay, what's everybody looking forward to? Let's just take another couple of comments from the floor while we're at it. Yeah. Yes, number 3.
Yeah, just going back to moving news in question time regionally. I mean, it's public service, and this is a fantastic opportunity for viewers to have access to people like government ministers. Is there a bit of arrogance there that, while the ministries are still in Whitehall, that, will they really think it's more important to appear on TV than spend, a whole day travelling rather than doing ministry work?
Okay, thank you. Another point? Down the front here, number 2.
David Graham from Attention. It's just a comment, really, because Eric Schmidt mentioned Salford. And I think what he was saying, though he didn't spell it out, is that if you make an industry the vehicle of public policy or social policy, you basically rule it out as a global player. And I don't hear very many people acknowledging that if you are successful, if you are more successful as an industry, if you can actually play a major role overseas or internationally, which we do not at the moment, as Mark Thompson acknowledged last year in his McTaggart, you deny your country wealth, and additional wealth is what pays or improves the lives of poor people. So I'm not hearing that argument recognised very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Let's whip round the panel very quickly with what everyone is looking forward to in this next year. And perhaps, what's the next big idea? That's what you're all looking for. What's the next big idea next year?
Well, that's a different version of the same question. Can I just say that one thing...
Very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. Well, okay, Oscar Pistorius runs in the World Athletics in Korea this week. It will be the first time that a man with no legs is in a major world championship. It's going to be fantastic. It's caused all sorts of debates around ability and disability, and it's probably the precursor to Channel 4 being the Paralympic broadcaster next year when the BBC are Olympic broadcaster, and I'm excited to be part of that.
Okay, next big thing next year, Elaine?
I'm looking forward to Downton Abbey coming back. We are launching a big new entertainment show next Saturday called Red or Black, which is, I hope, going to be a great show. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the X Factor.
And what's Dave Gorman up to?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I'm on tour to the end of the year. And I do know what the next big idea is, but it's for sale, so I'm not going to give it you free.
Pat?
Strictly, I think the lineup's announced very soon. The Olympics, absolutely. Hosting the Olympics is a massive privilege and great honour. And
a wee
also,
sneak preview of the Strictly lineup, come on.
No, I'm afraid I can't, because they don't tell me, because I talk too loosely. They just won't tell me what's going on, but I hear good things. The Olympics, absolutely, and there's a session, I think, afterwards where they're going to give you a sneak peek. But also Frozen Planet. I have seen episode 1, and it is to die for.
Great. Heather?
Very unoriginally. The Olympics, I think we're all looking forward to that, aren't we?
I'd also say that last year in the Glasgow Comedy Festival, I did a show and then took the sleeper train home. And I thought, I'll go to the bar and have one glass of wine just to help me settle. And David Dimbleby was in there, and he did not look happy.
Well, on that...
The Glasgow Comedy Festival, where no turn goes unstoned.
On that note, and on that mention of the great David Dimbleby, we will close this session. Thank you very much indeed to all my panel, Heather Jones, Pat Young, Dave Gorman, Elaine Bedell and Stuart Cosgrove. Thank you for coming. I hope you continue to enjoy the Edinburgh Television Festival, which continues till lunchtime today. Thank you for coming, and goodbye.